Thank you. We'll talk. He's got good reason. Thanks, Arun. Good morning. Welcome to our virtual broadcast here at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. Thank you for joining us today. We miss seeing y'all in person, but we're so glad we have this medium to see you. Be on the lookout for a call from our COVID-19 committee. Your feedback will help us create the best plan for our fall worship for this community. So if you see a call on your phone, it's from us.
And I want to let you know that I have started having office hours by Zoom in order for us to have another way to be in touch and in communication and just to be able to see each other's face, since I don't see your faces when I look into the TV lens, unless I imagine them that way. And we have a packed auditorium that way as well. But my next office hours will be this coming Saturday from 12:30 to 1:30. I had intended to start them this past week, but had a kind of a sudden journey to make on the 4th when the office hours were scheduled, so we missed that. But we will have one Saturday. I'm having them at varying times each week, so there are possibilities for people who could not tune in at a regular time to go on Zoom then. So look for details and you can tune in for that. And back to you.
For those of you who would like to join us on Zoom after the service, we will have our virtual coffee hour. We'll have that meeting code and password up on the screen here now, and then again at the end of the service. We'd love to see you, especially if you're a newcomer. Say hi, and we'll get started chatting.
Now the service begins proper with opening words, "Stay together and stick together" by Rod Richards. We who gather here in this tender and anxious and confusing time, we have been awash in a sea of information and misinformation and disinformation. And this information that we seek is simply so that we may make wise decisions about how we respond and learn how we hold one another when we can't hold one another, and decide how we can be when we can't be together. What is this we face? How best do we respond? And why is this happening? The why, the why, the why. And why do those who suffer so suffer most, always suffer most from what we now face? Why? And what can we do for those who are most at risk, most vulnerable all the time and now again? And how do we respond and how do we hold one another when we can't hold one another? And how do we stay together and stick together and worship together when we can't be together? Yet we are. Here we are here together.
For our chalice lighting today, we have words by Alice Anacheka Nasaman, Grounding in Our Faith. In a time of uncertainty, when everything around us is changing constantly, each day, new developments, rising numbers, changing guidelines, when the world we live in suddenly seems upside down and topsy-turvy, we light our chalice to remind ourselves of the grounding in our faith. We remember that the flaming chalice came into being as a beacon of hope during World War II, a secret symbol that offered help. In the midst of all, we wrap ourselves in the warm light of a familiar flame, a reminder of the strength that emerges when we come together in community.
And please recite with me our covenant, which is printed in the order of service. And as I retrieve the clicker, it'll be on the screen. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now we're going to sing, have our congregational sing, and I don't
We
think
have
I
number
have the right number
142.
here. 142, Let There Be Light.
Let there be light, let there be understanding, let all the nations gather, let them be face to face. Oh, Perish the sword, perish the angry judgment, perish the bombs and hunger, perish the fight for gain. Let there be light. Open our hearts to wonder. Perish the way of terror. Hallow the world God made.
And now it's story time with our religious educator, Kristen Olson.
Today's story is an Ethiopian tale retold by Heather Forrest in Wisdom Tales from Around the World. It's called Fire, Water, Truth, and Falsehood. Long ago, fire, water, truth, and falsehood lived together in one large house. Although all were polite to each other, they kept their distance. Truth and falsehood sat on opposite sides of the room. Fire constantly leapt out of water's path. One day, they went hunting together. They found a large number of cattle and began driving them home to their village. "Let us share these cattle equally," said Truth, as they traveled across the grasslands. "This is a fair way to divide our captives." No one disagreed with Truth except Falsehood. Falsehood wanted more than an equal share, but kept quiet about it for the moment. As the four hunters traveled back to the village, Falsehood went secretly to Water and whispered, "You are more powerful than fire. Destroy fire, and then there will be more cattle for each of us." Water flowed over to fire, bubbling and steaming until fire was gone. Water meandered along, cheerfully thinking about more cattle for itself. Falsehood, meanwhile, whispered to Truth, "Look, see for yourself. Water killed fire. Let us leave Water, who has cruelly destroyed our warm-hearted friend. We must take the cattle high into the mountains to graze." As Truth and Falsehood traveled up the mountain, Water tried to follow. But the mountain was too steep and water could not flow upwards. Water washed down upon itself, splashing and swirling around the rocks as it tumbled down the slope. Look and see, water is still tumbling down the mountainside to this day. Truth and Falsehood arrived at the mountaintop. Falsehood turned to Truth and said in a loud voice, "I am more powerful than you. You will be my servant. I am your master. All the cattle belong to me." Truth rose up and spoke out, "I will not be your servant." They battled and battled. Finally, they brought the argument to Wind to decide who was master. Wind didn't know what to do. Wind blew all over the world to ask people whether truth or falsehood was more powerful. Some people said, a single word of falsehood can completely destroy truth. Others insisted, like a small candle in the dark, truth can change every situation. Wind finally returned to the mountain and said, "I have seen that falsehood is very powerful, but it can rule only truth. But it can rule only where truth has stopped struggling to be heard. And it has been that way ever since."
And now it's anthem time. Today, the anthem is "Let This Be a House of Peace" by Jim Scott. We have our music director, Mickey Miller, and our accompanist, Bonnie Olson. Bonnie Rowe. I'm
Bonnie, get the
sorry.
piano.
Bonnie Olson is kind of the link between Kristen Olson, Bonnie is her mother, and Bonnie Rowe, who shares that first name together. So that's where my mind is today. Bonnie Rowe will be playing piano to Kristen's to Mickey's singing, and I will stop ad-libbing.
Thank you, Arun. this be a house of peace, of nature and humanity, of sorrow and elation. Let this be our house, a haven for the healing, an open room for question and our inspiration. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of freedom, guardian of our dignity and worth held deep inside us. Let this be our house, a platform for the free voice, where all our sacred differences here shall not divide us. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of prophecy. May vision for our children be our common theme. Let this be our house of myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story, cradle of our tender dreams. Let this be a house of peace. 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 Let this be a house of peace.
Now, please join me for a time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. These are trying times. We think especially of people who are not well, whether from COVID-19, from cancer, from other diseases, major and minor. This week, I was able to visit with one of our members who is in hospice. I don't want to give names on this broadcast, but this person is a longtime member of the congregation and is tired. But this member expressed love for the congregation. And of course, I represented the congregation in a time when there are limited opportunities to visit, and sometimes clergy get a little in when other members of the public cannot be there. So I did speak for all of us in giving support. Our reading today is "To the Death of Michael Brown We Bear Witness" by Teresa Soto, and is adapted. Today we will bear witness to the death of Michael Brown, who was shot by police and died on August 9th, 2014, 6 years ago today. And the circumstances of that tragedy ignited a movement recognizing that Black Lives Matter. We recognize as well that there are police officers, even in our congregation, who do good work and have our respect. And we recognize that Black Lives Matter is not opposition to police work or blue occupations, but there is a consciousness that there does need to be reform and reimagining. I will offer a part of the story of Michael Brown. This is a litany, and the congregation response is, "We bear witness." With reverence and sorrow, we remember the death of Michael Brown. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. On Saturday, August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was shot by an officer of the Ferguson Police Department in Ferguson, Missouri. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. The media gives us conflicting stories. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. We are not distracted by misinformation. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. Misinformation encourages us to put our frustration and sadness somewhere outside of ourselves, outside of these walls, on the police, on the dead young man, on the system. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. As a community, we reflect on the thread that connects the actions of an armed police officer with our own. We examine our snap judgments. We challenge the times we have remained silent while another suffered. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. We recognize that in order to challenge a system that is built to maintain racism, we must contemplate the effects of our everyday actions. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. We do not look away from the things that are hard to see. We know Black Lives Matter. We bear witness. When justice eludes us, we bear witness. We take courage. We bear witness. We extend love. We bear witness. We'll have a minute of silence.
Today, we have a reading by Nathan C. Walker called Beyond the Zero-Sum Game. For centuries, insiders have been democratizing their religions. Incremental moments of institutional reform have led to a new era of theological enlightenment. From out of ancient times into the twilight of now, these reformers have made a sacred vow to never mischaracterize freedom as a zero-sum game. True freedom is not jealous. True freedom is not envious. True freedom is not spiteful. True freedom does not desire to restrict the rights of others. True freedom knows not a selfish thought, knows not how to threaten. To sense true freedom is to know that your win is my glory and that your suffering is inextricably tied to my own. For the sum of all that is holy shines far beyond the tools of our evolving democracy, from party jingles to picket signs. The sum of all that is holy is found in our collective desire to know freedom, not as a political slogan, but as a way of life.
Now it's sermon time. Before I begin, I want to explain that the technical challenge this week has been our slides themselves. The machine went on the blink for a moment, and thanks to the engineering of Arun Nataraja, I think hitting the computer in just the right place, it's back and working, but we can't promise that it will not freeze again. The page A1, top right column, leading stories from today's newspapers. From the Toledo Blade. MAC shelves football, other sports this fall. Officials, coaches highlight safety, financial issues. From the Washington Post. Trump moves to bypass Congress. Unilateral steps on taxes, spending. Unemployment, eviction plans trigger questions. From the New York Times. Long legal fight may follow vote on election day. Stage set for conflict. Trump lays groundwork to discredit result. Biden gets ready. Okay, let's pretend that we're all caught up. This August, I'm speaking every Sunday on the topic catching up. My concept, inspired by reading about a minister who occasionally would intentionally preach on the news clippings he had accumulated but not used in his sermons, and would then give a Sunday talk on those saved items using snippets from many subjects, all thrown into one sermon. I thought I'd do the same thing, but when I focused on media and politics for today, When I focused on media and politics for today, I found that rather than giving brief summaries of several articles I saved, somehow trying to tie them into one unifying conclusion and calling that my Sunday address, I discovered that my custom of saving so many stories on what's in the news, the custom might not be to actually read them later, but to make some kind of an attempt to keep up with current events and to have something on the topics that interest me a bit more, just in case they don't stay in the news for you to get more about the event. I found that I'm fine deleting some unread, saving others for even later, and reading one or two that are relevant to today rather than to the day I saved the stories. Since the catching up idea for this series means looking back at least a little bit, we won't cover the current events today beyond that recitation of the top headlines, even though some items in the news should be highlighted, such as in politics, the executive branch going so far beyond a co-equal branch of government, and in media, the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on the health of newspapers especially, but on many news organizations, which without federal support could lead to the death of many local news organizations. And these two examples illustrate some intertwining of media and politics, that the norm is that media covers politics, but now the government is being called on to exert some political action to preserve the industry of journalism, to keep news real, and to help to refute the opinion of the current president that news is manufactured and fake unless it favors the Trump administration. Accusations of fake news without references to truth, I see as just media objectionable to people with political leanings counter to the reality of the news. I've been the media. I'm a left-leaning political independent, and I don't traffic in falsity. We also won't turn to my own clippings file, so you don't get examples of the news articles I've been saving. I'll catch up there on my own. Now, I think that with my having a couple of journalism degrees and a previous career working at publications that reported news in different areas, my covering religion, television, celebrities, media news, libraries, companies, and other areas, I am a certified news junkie. And though I haven't given much activity to election campaigns, as I kept some journalistic remove from involvement, I also used to work for a state legislature and then in legal publishing. So I have been in rooms where sausage is made, to use a political allegory, and I'm interested in politics. But I won't let media and politics rule my life. It's more important to live in the present, read the news, and know how politicians are leading our government than to let news and politics affect my daily living. If you live life well, you'll miss stories and then choose how intensively to catch up. The conclusion I reached for media and for politics in my life, and that I suggest for you, is that there's no need to catch up in detail. The stories will change, but it will be the same old story, you can say. Get rid of all those newspapers and New Yorkers that you intend to get to but haven't. Be in the world more rather than reading about it in depth and missing out on your own life. Now, I'm not saying to ignore news or politics. Remember the saying that newspapers are the first rough draft of history? I read a piece in Slate on the origins of that phrase, attributed to Philip Graham of the Washington Post, but with similar phrasings before then. But I found that Slate article via Google rather than having it in my own files. And also keep in mind the quotation, "Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it," attributed to the philosopher George Santayana. A piece from Big Think on that phrase was found in a Google search. with those quotations as guidance, do know what's going on, but be better aware of the big picture than the intricacies of the political issues of the day. And a little bit of homework: know what's important about today that affects the future in a real way, like people's abuse of ecology leading to a crisis about climate change. And that not doing your part in civic involvement, such as not voting if you're eligible to do that, means that you're letting the world change without you. So there's some blame when a bad president manipulates the process, gets elected without winning the popular vote, and is not capable of performing even the minimal duties of the office, and instead builds on partisan separation rather than unity of the people governed. Get a feel for the difference between breaking news and topics that will affect your life. In a way, everything changed for political followers and news junkies 40 years ago in 1980, when cable news network CNN launched and the 24-hour news cycle began. Though there could then be newscasts all day and all night with live anchors, and reruns of programs were kept to a minimum in favor of live anchors, all the news wasn't new. And breaking news just started to mean that they got a new story, not that an event happened deserving an extra read all about it. The stories were repeated in many segments, so the news that was there was more available, and it didn't really make room for more stories. No, instead of going wider for more news items, or really even deeper into the stories that were reported, what seemed to grow was commentary, opinion, and editorial. So more people were talking on air about the same stories. The last sermon I gave when we were all together on Sunday, March 8th, was on civic religion prior to the scheduled Ohio primary elections. And I have part 2 of that scheduled for November 1st, just before the November 3rd general election. And I expect most of us will have already voted absentee by mail by then. And I emphasized our denominational attention in this election year with you, the vote, to have Unitarian Universalists involved themselves as voters, and to encourage them to work to register more people to vote, and to inspire them to take part, especially in this year's presidential election, to advocate change in a way that respects our Unitarian Universalist purpose and principles. So we'll have politics in church in appropriate ways that don't campaign for particular candidates, but do call our attention to issues that affect us and the world, and that call out office holders who aren't serving the people in a way that illustrates inherent worth and dignity. All people having inherent worth and dignity is the first principle that Unitarian Universalist congregations covenant to affirm and promote. Politics does seem to apply to our second principle: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And our fifth one, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. Which leads to the sixth, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And media is solidly in our fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. For this week of catching up, it was depressing at times looking at the headlines of political stories I had saved to read later. A lot of the items were analysis on the actions of a president I don't respect. I found there's no need and certainly no desire to catch up on stories of what I could see are actions in a direction that could be disastrous to the people of this country and of the world, and that make me hope more that the people come to their senses and this November 3rd elect someone who can make Washington work for all the people, and especially for we who have been harmed in many ways by the actions of the current administration. As for media, it's not one block of news corporations being the media, though we've moved much farther in consolidation of media companies than scholars ever imagined, I'd say, in their studies of monopolizing the media. The predictions of 6 companies controlling the vast majority of information has come close to being true, if it's still as many as 6. The change from when I studied this is in social media, which came into existence pretty much after I finished my journalism schooling. And don't forget that I'm editor-in-chief of all Toledo Unitarians media, so I keep my news muscles ready in a way. I suggest that you continue to read the news or watch it or listen to it or just note the stories on your Facebook or Twitter feed that people share and be current to some degree. Keep a clippings file if that's your habit. Save stories for later reading and then either read them or don't, because you might have processed something just from that little act of thinking that you want to save that article for some reason. And do it for the stories, not trying to read the newspaper cover to cover every day or the New Yorker every week just because you subscribe to it. That gets to be homework, not reading to keep current or reading for pleasure. Plus, by all means, seek good news and share good news of your own. Blessed be.
Thank you. We've come to our time of offering, and instead of passing a plate around, we invite you to contribute as you're able, either through mail at First Unitarian Church here on 3205 Glendale Avenue, or you can open a new tab and go to uutoledo.org. You can click on Give and then click on Online Giving. However you are able, as much as you're comfortable. We really appreciate those contributions.
And now, coming soon, next week's 10 a.m. Spiritual Adventures Forum will have Terry Lane interviewing lawyer and activist Terry Lodge. And the 11 a.m. service is part 3 of this Catching Up series, Pandemic and Progress.
Immediately after today's service, we invite you again to join us for our Zoom coffee hour. So refill your coffee or your tea, whatever you've got, and we'd love to sit and chat. We invite visitors warmly every week. Please join us at the Zoom code above, the password listed.
Now our closing words, My Commitments to Myself by Laura Mancuso. I take care of myself first because I am deserving of exquisite care. I take care of myself to maintain the capacity to help others. I move and stretch my body every day. I spend time in nature, attuning my senses to the earth's wisdom. I ration my daily exposure to the news. I identify and access credible sources of information. I protect myself from becoming overwhelmed by information about the pandemic. I pace myself. I sit with the reality of uncertainty and impermanence and allow it to temper my desire for control. I listen without judgment to others' reactions, which may be different from mine. I forgive myself and others when stress brings out our shadow selves. I feel fear fully when I am fearful. I experience sadness fully when I am sad. I allow anger fully when I am angry. I relish joy fully when I am joyful. I seek out healthy pleasures and indulge in them without guilt. I remind myself that feelings are transient states that move through me. They do not last, and they do not define me, nor do my thoughts. I balance my drive for self-improvement with compassionate acceptance of myself as I am right now. I initiate contact with loved ones to let them know I hold them in my heart. I seek out with increased sensitivity those who are the most vulnerable. If possible, I share my resources with those who need help to survive. When possible, I move away from people, situations, and experiences that do not serve my highest good. I strengthen my connection to my source of spiritual strength so that I continue to be replenished. I acknowledge the nearness of death as a key motivator for living a full life. I pray for the suffering of all beings to cease. I grieve my losses and celebrate my successes. I remain open to new ways of being, surprising sources of joy, and unanticipated discoveries every day.
As we send the flame, we hear words by Kimberly Quinn Johnson, fitted for this day, with inspiration of the poem for South African women by June Jordan, which she presented at the UN on August 9th of 1978. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are not perfect, but we are perfectly fitted for this day. We are not without fault, but we can be honest to face our past as we chart a new future. We are the ones we have been waiting for. May we be bold and courageous to chart that new future. May we have faith in a future that is not known. We are the ones we have been waiting for.